A little while ago, I was invited to a university to speak at the Atheistic Society. They said, Pastor Barrett, we would like you to come and get involved in a debate with all the atheists. I said, fine. I said, what's the heading? Well, what's the caption? What are we debating on? And they said this, the debate is this, the premise is, there is no God. I said, okay. They said, yeah, the president of the Atheistic Club, he will stand up and he will share for 15 minutes on how there is no God. And then we're going to give you 10 minutes to prove to us that there is a God. I said, bro, I don't need 10. I only need 2 minutes. He said, come on down. So I went down. I won't tell you which university it was, but I drove to Cambridge. And when I got to Cambridge, I go into this lecture hall, right? And there's, I don't know, 1,800, 1,000 students there. And the lead atheist, he gets up and he's preaching. And he's spitting and he's frothing at the mouth and he's eloquent. He's brilliant. How can any rational person believe that there is a God? You got to be stupid to believe that there is a God. And all these sorts of things, all the things that you've heard. And then they said, and now we're going to get Glenn Barrett. He's going to come up and tell us why there is a God. Have you ever read the verse, led like a lamb to the slaughter? So I get up on stage and there's boos and hisses and all these sorts of things. And I come up the front and I just said to the guy, I said, listen, you spoke so eloquently. I said, come and join me on stage. So he came and joined me at the podium at the front there. And I said, you believe there is no God? He said, there is no God. You cannot be a rational person and believe there is a God. I said, okay, help me out with this. I want to show you something. And I drew a circle on a whiteboard like this. I said, this circle represents knowledge. Everything that could ever be known about any subject fits in there. All the sciences, all the arts. You're an intelligent man. You study at this university. How much do you know of everything that could possibly be known? So he took a pen and he drew that and he went, I reckon I know this much. I said, wow, you're intelligent. He said, yeah, I am. I said, that's brilliant. I said, so that's what you do know? He said, yes. I said, and that's what you don't know? He said, yes. But this does exist. You just haven't discovered it yet. Yes. Therefore, could God not exist in a dimension that you haven't yet discovered? Answer, yes. Therefore, sir, I would suggest you're not an atheist, you're an agnostic and one step closer to knowing my Jesus.
So a while back, the Facebook page God TV posted a video featuring a Christian pastor by the name of Glenn Barrett. Glenn claimed to have been invited to a debate by a group of atheists at a university in Cambridge. The premise of the debate was, there is no God. And apparently Pastor Barrett was treated very unfairly, given less time to talk than his opponent, and yet still managed to carry the day. His argument was one of the oldest, most tired arguments Christian apologists use, and yet Pastor Barrett apparently managed to stump the entire group of atheists with it. The argument goes like this. We don't know everything. In fact, we don't even know the bulk of everything. 95% of all attainable knowledge in the universe is not possessed by us. Therefore, God exists in the 95% of stuff we don't know. This is an argument from ignorance logical fallacy, and the whole point is to try and get atheists to admit that they could be wrong about the existence of gods. Something which I'm willing to bet the bulk of all atheists would freely do. I myself will grant just about any hypothetical and any argument just to see where the train goes, so to speak. If you ask me if it's possible that I could be wrong about something, the existence of gods or otherwise, I'll probably say sure. But then I'll expect you to show me good reasons for me to think I'm wrong, especially if I am in all likelihood probably right. I don't just say I could be wrong, I don't know, therefore I am wrong. But that is as far as this argument goes. It essentially just asks atheists if they could be wrong, then celebrates when they say sure. This is not an especially compelling argument to anyone who doesn't already believe the conclusion. But it sounds really good to anyone who does and won't question it, which makes it a favorite of pastors to spoon-feed to their enthusiastic audiences. And this argument almost always comes in the form of a story about a debate between the pastor who tells it and some atheist or a group of atheists, usually at a university or place of higher learning. The parameters of the debate are usually very unfair, and the crowd very hostile. Take this guy, for instance.
Often I'd go out on a limb for God. I was in Hungary and the Berlin Wall fell, and the universities opened up. And so the president of a university, a communist university in Székesvárad, Hungary, came and he said, we want you to come and speak at this university. And so I said, fine. And he said, now here's the ground rules. We are going to have one of our communist astronomers speak. Your topic is astronomy. You have to speak for 1 hour and show that there's a God from astronomy. Then our astronomer is going to speak for 1 hour and show why there is no God on astronomy. And then the students are going to ask questions. Well, you know, I'm happy to speak anytime I can, but I'm not an astronomer, I'm a theologian. But I got some lectures on astronomy, and so I said, Lord, it's okay, I'll do it. But, you know, you've got to be wise. And so I said to this brother, I said, now, brother, I'm happy to come, but since I'm your guest, I want your astronomer to go first. He can show me how to do it. I didn't want to speak and then him raise questions on what I was saying. I wanted him to speak and then me raise questions, because I don't have to know a lot, but I not ask questions. So I got to the university. When I came to the university, the president met me, and he was nervous. His face was red, and he said, Pastor, we have got a major problem. The astronomer has an emergency appointment, and he can't make it. I said, that's no problem. Just give me 2 hours, that's all. So I spoke to the students on archaeology and astronomy. At the end of the lecture came the question and answer period. So one student, I could see him. He looked over at his professors. Professors are sitting in one place, and you have to understand, this is a dyed-in-the-will, hard communist area. And, you know, I was like the lamb thrown to the wolves. But if you have the Lamb of God in your heart, lambs can slay dragons. So, first student raises his hand. Dr. Finley. Well, I was no doctor. I'm just a simple, humble preacher. Dr. Finley, I have a question. Yes, what's your question? When the Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin went up there in space, he looked for God and didn't find him. He didn't see him. Pastor Finley, I want to know, have you personally seen God? And if you haven't, how can you believe? We don't believe. You know, the Bible says that God will give you answers you've never thought about before. And the Lord gave me an answer that I had never thought about until that moment. I said, may I ask you a question? But I really don't want to ask you. I'd like to ask the faculty. This is one of the most prestigious universities in all of Hungary. And I know that your faculty has PhDs from a variety of disciplines, and your faculty is very honest. So I want to leave God out and faith out and the Bible out, and I just want to ask the faculty some questions, then I'll come back and answer your question. He said, fine. So now, faculty, of all the knowledge in the world, how much knowledge do your students have? Let me give you an example. There are well over 2,000 spoken languages in the world. In the country of New Guinea alone, there are 700 dialects. Let's suppose we have a quiz right now and give your students dialects, a quiz on dialects. How many of the 700 dialects in New Guinea could your students speak? Another question. Let's suppose we gave your students a quiz on the 13th Ming dynasty of China and the 58 emperors in the 13th Ming dynasty and all of their wives and the names of their children. Let's suppose that there are 10,000 new books printed a day. How many of have your students read? Of all the knowledge of biochemistry in the world, do your students know 95% of all the biochemistry knowledge? Do they know 90% of all the biochemistry knowledge? 50%? Take histology. Of all the knowledge of histology in the world. And I said, let's say that knowledge is a body of 100%. Would you say that your students know 90% of all there is to know in the world? They said no. I said, just intellectually, did they know 50% of all there is to know? No. Did they know 20% of all there is to know? Of all this great body of knowledge, of every fact and knowledge in the world, let's say your students know 5%. Just from an intellectual standpoint, they said, well, Dr. Finley, they don't know 5%, but I'm going to give them 5%. If your students know 5% of all there is to know, it means that they don't know 95% of all there is to know. Intellectually, is that a good argument? Yeah, if you know 5%, you don't know 95%. Now let me ask you my next question. If by your own admission your students only know 5% of all there is to know, could it be possible that God exists in the 95% of the knowledge they don't have? Is that possible? I looked at those faculty members and they said, Dr. Finley, that's possible.
Oh yes, This guy is so clever he thought of this argument on the spot, and yet it sounds exactly like the argument so many other pastors have used to make themselves look good to their audience, to make it look like they're out there in the trenches, so to speak, debating atheists and kicking ass and taking names. This seems to be a fairly standard tactic for many Christian apologists, unfortunately. A few years ago, there was a story that went viral. It was called The Chalk Story. And it was about a Christian college student who stood up to an atheist professor of philosophy who taught a class required for the student's major. Essentially, it was the plot of God's Not Dead, except it wasn't being presented as fiction. This was being presented as something that really happened at the University of Southern California. There are a lot of details about this story that don't quite add up, and it seems to have been plagiarized almost word for word from a book of fictional Christian inspiration stories. So basically, some Christian who no doubt thinks they're morally superior decided to lie without any concern for the damage that might be caused to the reputation of a respected university, plagiarized somebody else's work of fiction, and spun the whole thing as though the event was actually something real that actually happened. Then a lot more Christians passed the story along without bothering to check and see if it was even true or not. This is also common in books written by Christian apologists. I've read a fair few in my day, and in almost all of them, there is a debate which usually happens with a college professor. A lot of times, these debates seem to happen at bus stops, if not on university grounds, and the debaters are, of course, the author of the book and some unnamed atheist professor of philosophy who teaches at a prestigious university. The world must be populated with atheist professors of philosophy who suck at debating and have nothing better to do than hang out at bus stops. Maybe I should ride the bus more often. At the very least, in the case of Pastor Barrett, we can say with a fair amount of certainty that this debate never happened. There is an atheist society at the University of Cambridge, however, they claim they've never heard of this guy, and no such debate ever took place, which should come as no surprise to anyone given the dubious nature of Pastor Barrett's claims. Also, the God TV Facebook page has since taken the video down, but luckily the friendly atheist grabbed a copy and reposted it, so the video is still available. Listen, I know there are a lot of Christians who have a lot of trouble distinguishing between fact and fiction, sometimes. But this just seems like blatant dishonesty to me. That's all I've got for today, so there's really nothing left to do at this point except thank the Quiet Atheist for agreeing to host this video on his channel. Thanks, man, it really means a lot to me.